Hey guys, and welcome to another Supercycle Super Tips. So today what we're going to talk about is how to set up your full suspension mountain bike, specifically forks and rear shocks that require air pressure set. So let's get into it. So the tool that you're going to need, which may or may not come with the bike when you bought it, if not, stop into your local bike shop, pick one up. They're not too expensive, but it's referred to as a shock pump, and it'll just be a kind of a small handheld pump designed to put in high pressure at low volume. It's going to usually have a little arm there that's a little bit flexy. That way you can kind of give a little bit of pump, makes it a little bit easier. It just screws right onto the fork or the rear shock with that little guy. Will always come with a gauge because you're going to need to know exactly how much pressure that you're putting into the fork or the shock, as well as some of them will come with a little pressure release gauge there in case you want to maybe put too much in, you want to drop a little bit out, use that little gauge there. So let's go ahead and start with the front fork, and I'll show you how we set this front fork up for this bike. So to get started, most front forks will come with an air sprung leg here where we're going to put the air pressure, and then the other leg is considered the damping leg. This is where we're going to control the rebound, compression, and the lockout. So to start on adding the pressure here, we're going to undo the top cap. Most bikes will have the top cap up here. Occasionally you'll find something on the bottom as well, but usually look up top at first. So remove that, and what we'll find is a traditional car valve or a Schrader valve right on top. So we'll take our shock pump here, and then we're going to slowly start to screw that in to the valve until we see it read. Go another maybe half turn or full turn after that to make a good seal. So now what we want to do is check our chart or whatever the recommended pressure would be for this shock and the rider. So if we took a rider with, let's say, weighs 100 kilo, we go to Trek suspension setup, because this is the Trek. If you have a different type of bike, check their setup as well. But the Trek would say that per kilo that the rider weighs, you put the same amount in PSI for this exact bike and this fork. So what we'll do is we'll simply pump up until our gauge reads 100 PSI. Just take a second of pumping. And there we go. Now, if for any reason we've put in a little bit too much, just simply take the bleed valve and just slightly tap it until we read exactly where we want to be. So that's it. Simple enough. Unscrew. Now, you might hear a little bit of air escape when you actually unscrew that. What it's actually doing is any of the pressure that's up in this hose is probably going to release, but most likely the pressure you put in the fork stays in the fork. It's not leaking out, so don't feel like you have to re-pump it back up. When you're done, always remember, replace your top cap. Usually has a little air seal in there as well, just to keep debris out and just kind of act as a secondary air seal as well. So screw that back on, just finger tight. If you put this a little bit too tight, then it will bind. It'll be difficult to get undone. There you go. Now the rear shock is going to be quite similar to the front fork, only everything's contained into the one cylinder here. So usually have that little cap, remove the cap, take your shock pump, and just like the front fork, screw it onto the shock in the back. Now this one's going to register much higher, which is pretty typical. So in the back of the bike, again, refer to your charts or recommended starting pressure. So for the same rider, let's say this bike, for this shock recommends about 180 PSI, which we're about at. Again, if you need to release a little bit, you can always use the bleed valve. We'll bring that up to proper pressure, and you're done. Go ahead and unscrew that. And now our pressure is set. Keep in mind, these are always recommended starting pressures. Once you get out to the trail, you may find that you prefer it to be a little softer or a little bit firmer, depending upon the trail conditions and your style of riding. Now, once you've set the pressure, the next step, just like the front fork, is to adjust the rebound. We'll adjust it in the same way and test it by squishing it. Make sure it's not too fast or too slow. So now that we've got the air pressure and the rebound set, the last thing to note are the compression or the firmness settings, sometimes called a pro pedal. What you'll find is on this shock specifically, this is a Fox Float with a reactive damper by Trek, so a very good quality rear shock, is you've got a really firm setting for maybe pedaling hard, sprinting, or on-road. Then you've got a medium firm setting. This is probably advised if you're just climbing up a normal bicycle trail. gives you really good pedal efficiency, but also allows the rear wheel to absorb all the bumps and rocks. And then you've got full open, which is what you're going to be using if you're descending. One thing to note, most shocks will have this little O-ring, this little rubber band on what's called the stanchion of the fork or the shock. This is a good indicator. When you start your ride, push it all the way up. And then by the end of the ride, note where in the stanchion it sits. If you finish the ride and that rubber band's right there in the middle, you probably only use half of the available travel. If it's all the way down at the bottom, then that's a good sign. You've used all of the travel in your fork, and the air pressure you set before the ride is probably very good. If you find that you bottom out, and you'll feel that when you hit the big stuff, the big drops or big rocks, if you constantly bottom out the suspension, then the next time you go out, maybe add a little bit more pressure and find that happy medium. Once you found it, most of the time, check it every month or so, but it should hold pressure. All right, guys, well, that's how you set up your mountain bike suspension. If you have any questions, stop into your local shop and we'll help you set it up one-on-one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.